the morning they came to watch him die. Damascus. May 18, 1965. The square is already full before dawn. Thousands of people pressed against each other in the pale morning light. Government workers, soldiers, schoolchildren pulled from their beds and told to come, told to watch. Military trucks ring the perimeter. Loudspeakers crackle with the voice of a radio announcer reading a verdict that has already been decided, to a crowd that already knows the outcome. In the center of Martyrs Square, a wooden gallows stands. A man is brought forward. He is not a large man, not physically imposing. He wears a white cloth wrapped around his head, and his hands are bound behind his back. He walks calmly. Those close enough to see his face later describe his expression as something strange, not the face of a broken man, not the face of someone begging. Something quieter than that, something settled. His name, the announcer declares, is Eli Cohen, an Israeli spy, an enemy of the Syrian people, a traitor to the Arab nation. The crowd roars. But what the crowd does not know, what almost no one in that square understands in that moment, is the staggering scale of what this one man had done, what he had seen, what he had heard, what he had been given access to, freely, willingly, over 4 extraordinary years. Because this man they are about to execute had sat at the table with Syria's highest military commanders. He had drunk coffee with generals. He had toured the most sensitive military installations in the country, the ones facing Israel, the fortified ridgelines of the Golan Heights, and had done so as a guest. An honored guest. He had been friends, genuine, lasting friends, with the man who would become president of Syria. And he had been, seriously and openly, considered for the position of Syria's Deputy Minister of Defense. The rope is placed around his neck. The man who stood closer to the heart of an enemy government than perhaps any spy in the 20th century closes his eyes. And the paradox of his life hangs in the morning air like smoke. How does a Jewish boy from Alexandria, Egypt, become the most trusted foreigner in Damascus? What one man did that changed a war before he was caught? Eli Cohen transmitted intelligence so precise, so devastating in its detail, that it would reshape the entire strategic balance of the Middle East. He reported the locations of Syrian gun emplacements on the Golan Heights. He named the officers who commanded them. He described underground bunkers, supply routes, the placement of anti-tank ditches, the coordinates of command centers that Syrian engineers had spent years constructing in absolute secrecy. He attended private military briefings meant only for the Syrian high command, and then encoded everything he had heard and sent it to Tel Aviv. When Israel launched its assault on the Golan Heights during the Six-Day War in June 1967, 2 years after Cohen's execution, Israeli commanders used maps and intelligence that bore, directly and unmistakably, the fingerprints of Eli Cohen's work. The assault that seemed nearly impossible, against fortifications that Syrian generals believed were impregnable, succeeded in less than 2 days. Soldiers who fought on the Golan Heights later said that they had moved through the terrain as though they already knew it, because, in a sense, they did. One man, 4 years, an alias, a suitcase, and the courage, or the madness, to walk straight into the center of the enemy and smile. The question nitrogen monoxide one could answer. So how did he do it? How does a man from the wrong country, speaking the wrong language by birth, raised in the wrong religion, how does he not merely infiltrate a hostile intelligence service, but rise to the edge of its government? How does he survive 4 years in a city where one wrong word, one slip of accent, one suspicious neighbor, one radio transmission caught at the wrong frequency would mean torture and death? And what does it cost a man, truly cost him, to become someone else, so completely that the person he actually is almost disappears? The answer begins not in Damascus, it begins in Alexandria. The boy who spoke the enemy's language. The year is 1924. The city is Alexandria, Egypt, a Mediterranean port humming with salt air and commerce, a cosmopolitan place where French and Arabic and Greek tumble over each other in the markets, where the old Jewish community has lived 4 generations, woven into the fabric of the city, the way thread is woven into cloth. On December 26th of that year, a boy is born into a Jewish family of Syrian origin. His parents name him Eli, his full name, Eli Cohen. The family is modest, educated, deeply rooted in both their Jewish identity and the rhythms of Egyptian life. He grows up speaking Arabic as his first language, not textbook Arabic, not studied Arabic. The Arabic of the street, of the market, of the neighbor shouting over a fence, fluent, natural, native. He absorbs the culture the way children absorb everything, without effort, without awareness, the way water fills the shape of whatever holds it. He attends a Jewish school. He studies French. He is bright, exceptionally so, with a particular gift for languages and an even more particular gift for reading people. Understanding what they want. Understanding what makes them trust you. By the late 1940s, the world around Eli Cohen is changing in ways that will eventually force every decision he makes. The State of Israel, declared in 1948, the Arab world erupts. Across Egypt, across Syria, across the entire region, Jewish communities that had existed for centuries suddenly find themselves viewed through a new and dangerous lens, not as neighbors, not as citizens, but as a fifth column. As enemies within, in Alexandria, the pressure builds slowly, then all at once. Jewish businesses are nationalized. Jewish professionals lose their licenses. The community that had been woven into the city for so long finds itself being pulled out, thread by thread. Eli Cohen watches this happen. He's already involved, by this point, in quiet work, low-level intelligence gathering for the nascent Israeli state, making contact with Egyptian Jews who wish to emigrate, moving information through informal networks. He's not a trained spy. He's a young man with the right skills, discovered by people who know how to recognize them. By 1957, the situation has become untenable. Cohen emigrates to Israel. He's 32 years old. He's leaving behind everything he has ever known, the streets of Alexandria, the sound of Arabic spoken around him, second skin, and arriving in a country that is, in many ways, foreign to him, even as it is the country of his people. He settles. He finds work as a clerk. He marries a woman named Nadia. He tries, like thousands of other new immigrants, to build a quiet life. But the Mossad has been watching him. They know what he is. They know what he carries in him. Not just the languages, not just a cultural fluency, but something harder to name. A steadiness under pressure, a facility for becoming whatever the moment requires. A man who can walk into a room full of strangers and, within minutes, be the person everyone wants to talk to. In 1960, they approach him. The crack in Syria's armor, the intelligence services of Israel faced a specific and urgent problem in the early 1960s. Syria. Syria was not merely a hostile neighbor. Syria was a state in permanent revolutionary convulsion, governments rising and falling, generals seizing power, and then losing it, Ba'ath Party factions maneuvering against each other in a country where the true levers of power were never where they appeared to be. Understanding Syria meant understanding who was talking to whom behind closed doors, which general was loyal to which faction, what the military was actually planning versus what it announced publicly. Standard intelligence methods were insufficient. Syria's security apparatus, advised and assisted by Soviet intelligence, was paranoid and effective, penetrating it from the outside, through recruited agents, through intercepted communications, gave fragments, shadows, never the full picture. What was needed, the Mossad concluded, was someone inside. Not an informant, not a low-level contact. Someone embedded at the highest levels. Someone who would be present in the rooms where decisions were made. The opportunity they identified was elegant in its audacity. Syria had, in the 1950s, sent thousands of young men abroad for education, to Europe, to South America, and many of them had settled in diaspora communities, particularly in Argentina, which had a substantial Syrian Arab population. These expatriates moved in tight social circles, maintained their language and culture, and frequently returned to Syria as business contacts, as investors, as men with ties to the homeland and money earned abroad. They were, in short, a community through which an outsider might approach Syria without appearing to approach it at all. The Mossad's idea: create a legend, build a man from scratch. A Syrian who had grown up in Argentina, who had made money there, who now wished to return to his homeland, to invest, to reconnect. A man who would arrive in Damascus not as a stranger, but as a son returning home. For this to work, they needed someone with native Arabic, not learned Arabic, native Arabic, someone who understood Syrian culture not academically, but in his bones. Someone who could pass not 4 months, but 4 years. They needed Eli Cohen. He accepted. They told him to become someone else forever. The plan, laid out in a series of meetings in Tel Aviv in 1960 and 1961, was extraordinary in its ambition and terrifying in its detail. Eli Cohen would cease to exist. In his place, a new man would be constructed, Kamel Amin Thaabet, born in Syria, raised in Alexandria, a biographical echo that gave Cohen's genuine memories a place to live within the legend, emigrated to Argentina as a young man, built a successful business career in Buenos Aires, and now, approaching his 40th year, feeling the pull of the homeland. Wanting to return, wanting to contribute, the cover story was carefully chosen. It explained his slight Egyptian accent. He had lived there as a child, after all. It explained any gaps in his knowledge of specific Syrian geography or customs. He had been away for so long. It gave him a profession that required no fixed office and provided a natural reason to travel, to meet people, to ask questions, international business. Cohen spent months in training. He refined his cover story until it breathed on its own, until he could answer any question about it, without the pause of construction. He studied Syrian military structure, Syrian political factions, Syrian social hierarchies, who bowed to whom, what subjects were safe to broach, what silences were required. He was trained in the operation of a small shortwave radio transmitter, the device that would be his only real connection to Israel. Through this, he would send his intelligence. But the radio was the great danger. Every transmission was a risk. Soviet-supplied detection equipment could, with enough time and the right positioning, triangulate a signal. The transmissions would have to be brief, carefully timed, and disguised, when possible, within the radio noise of a busy city. In early 1961, Eli Cohen, traveling under his new name and a new passport, flew to Argentina. He spent nearly a year there. This was not preparation. This was performance. He lived as Kamel Amin Thaabet. He rented an apartment in Buenos Aires. He attended the Syrian expatriate social club. He made friends, genuine friendships, the kind that develop over shared meals and repeated evenings, and the particular warmth of exiles, bonding over a homeland they miss. He built a reputation as a generous, socially engaged man with money, connections, and a deep love for Syria. And then, in early 1962, Kamel Amin Thaabet, carrying letters of introduction, business cards, and a network of contacts who genuinely liked him, booked a flight to Damascus. Eli Cohen was going home, to a country that had never been his home. 4 years inside the enemy's inner circle, Damascus received him. This is the thing that must be understood about what happened next. Damascus did not merely tolerate Kamel Amin Thaabet. It embraced him, welcomed him, pulled him in. The apartment he rented was on Abu Rumayna Street, one of the most desirable addresses in the Syrian capital, a neighborhood of government officials, military officers, wealthy businessmen. He chose it deliberately. Proximity was intelligence. The man who lived on the right street, in the right building, heard things no informant could report. He entertained. This was the key, not the radio, not the tradecraft, not the technical skill of espionage, but the ancient and irreplaceable art of hospitality. Cohen threw dinner parties. He cooked. He provided liquor in a city where alcohol was available, but not always abundant. He was funny, warm, curious, attentive. He remembered names. He asked after children. He listened, really listened, when men talked about their frustrations, their ambitions, their complaints. Military officers came to his apartment. Then senior officers, then officers of real consequence. And in those rooms, over those tables, with that particular loosening that happens when a trusted friend pours another drink, men talked. They talked about Syria's military deployments, about the political situation, about rivalries between factions, disputes between commanders, about the Golan Heights, the volcanic plateau that Syria had fortified facing Israel, the series of bunkers and emplacements and command positions that Syrian generals were confident could stop any Israeli advance cold. Cohen listened to everything. He asked questions that seemed like natural curiosity from a patriotic Syrian businessman. How are our defenses looking? Are the boys properly equipped? The Israelis, are they really as strong as they say? And in the evenings, after his guests had gone, he would open a hidden compartment in his apartment, remove the small radio transmitter, and encode everything he had heard. Brief transmissions, precise coordinates, names, dates, capabilities. Then the compartment closed, the equipment vanished, and Kamel Amin Thaabet went to bed. The friendship that mattered most developed, not through calculation, but through the genuine alchemy of compatible personalities. His name was Amin al-Hafez, a military officer of significant rank and ambition, a man on the rise within the Ba'ath Party, someone with a particular directness of character that Cohen found, in some private part of himself, genuinely appealing. They became friends, real friends, by any measure, the kind shaped by repeated contact and mutual affection, not merely convenience. When Amin al-Hafez seized power in a coup in 1963 and became president of Syria, he did not forget his friend Kamel Amin Thaabet. He remembered him, consulted him, trusted him. The spy was now dining with the head of state. Cohen walked his most extraordinary tightrope in 1963 and 1964. He was invited to tour Syrian military installations. He was shown the Golan Heights fortifications, the bunkers, the artillery positions, the anti-tank infrastructure. He was present for briefings that no foreign intelligence service had ever come close to accessing. One detail from this period has become almost legendary. During a tour of Syrian positions on the Golan Heights, Cohen suggested that the soldiers must suffer terribly in the summer heat with no shade. Why not? He proposed helpfully, plant eucalyptus trees near the bunkers to provide cover for the troops. The Syrian military, charmed by the patriotic concern of their friend, followed the suggestion. Those trees, planted by Syrian soldiers following the advice of an Israeli spy, would later serve as markers for Israeli forces during the 1967 assault. The tree lines showed Israeli commanders where the bunkers were. The kindness of the gesture had been, all along, the precision of a weapon, but the longer the operation continued, the more the pressure built. Cohen was transmitting more frequently than was safe. The Soviet advisors working with Syrian intelligence were good at their jobs. Sensitive direction-finding equipment had been brought into the country. Every transmission Eli Cohen sent was one more chance for the signal to be caught. His handlers in Tel Aviv urged caution. Shorter transmissions, longer intervals. Cohen pressed forward. He had information. He had access. He had the ear of the president of Syria. He could not stop. The knock at the door, January 24, 1965. Cohen is sitting at his radio transmitter in the apartment on Abu Rumayna Street. It is early morning, the time he has chosen, because the city's radio traffic is lighter. The background noise that masks his signal somewhat thinner. The darkness still heavy enough to feel like cover. He begins to transmit what he does not know, what no one has told him, because no one knows how to tell him without blowing the operation, is that Soviet-supplied detection equipment, operated by Soviet technicians working directly with Syrian intelligence, has been tracking signal anomalies in Damascus for weeks. They have narrowed it down to a neighborhood, then to a street. The transmission ends. Cohen removes his headset, begins to disassemble the equipment. The city outside his window is quiet. Somewhere, a muezzin calls the morning prayer. The sound drifts through the glass, like something from a dream. There is a knock at the door, not the knock of a friend, not the knock of a servant or a delivery. The knock of men who have been trained to knock exactly that way, with weight, with finality, with the authority of the state behind every knuckle. Cohen closes the hidden compartment. He may have taken a breath. He may have paused for just a second in the center of his apartment. This apartment where he had entertained generals, laughed with a president, built a life that was both entirely real and entirely false. And then he went to the door. Syrian intelligence officers flooded the room. The transmitter was found within minutes. The encoded messages were found. The equipment was catalogued, photographed, seized. Eli Cohen, Kamel Amin Thaabet, stood in the center of his apartment and said nothing useful. They took him, the spy who gave them nothing. The interrogation lasted weeks. Syrian intelligence, initially, did not fully believe what they had found. The depth of the penetration, a man this close, this trusted, this embedded, was almost too enormous to process. Surely there were others. Surely this was part of a larger network. They interrogated Cohen with escalating desperation, trying to find the threads they were certain must be there. Cohen, by all accounts, gave them almost nothing. He admitted he was Israeli. He gave his real name. Beyond that, the interrogations produced little of operational value, not the identities of his handlers, not the methods of communication, not the intelligence that had already been transmitted. Amin al-Thaabet, upon learning that his friend Kamel was an Israeli spy, reportedly sat in silence for a long time. The betrayal was absolute, personal, and humiliating at a national scale. The Syrian president had been, in effect, an unwitting intelligence asset. The proximity of his friendship, the very mechanism through which the state's secrets had been extracted. Across the Arab world, the news of Cohen's capture traveled like a shockwave. Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, every neighboring intelligence service began an emergency audit. How many others were there? Where were the other camels? The Syrian government announced that Kamel Amin Thaabet had been unmasked, that his crimes were proven, that justice would be served publicly as a message. Multiple governments interceded on Cohen's behalf. France, Canada, and others made appeals. Even the Pope sent a request for clemency. President Amin al-Thaabet refused all of them. On May 18, 1965, at 3:27 in the morning, Eli Cohen was led into Martyrs Square and hanged. The execution was broadcast on Syrian state television. His body was left on the gallows for 6 hours as the crowd that had been assembled to witness it dispersed slowly in the early light. He was 40 years old. In Tel Aviv, his wife Nadia was told. She had known, in the way that spouses of field agents know, not the details, never the details, but the shape of the danger. She had raised their children, written letters she could not send, waited through silences that stretched for weeks. Now there was a different kind of silence. She would spend the next 5 decades requesting, demanding, appealing for the return of her husband's remains from Syria. Syria refused. How one man's secrets won a war 2 years after Eli Cohen's execution. In June 1967, Israel launched a war it expected to be existential and finished in 6 days. The assault on the Golan Heights was, by every military analysis, the most difficult operation of the war. The terrain was volcanic rock and steep escarpment. The Syrian fortifications had been constructed over years, layered, reinforced, advised by Soviet engineers who knew exactly what they were building. Israeli commanders knew that a frontal assault against those positions would cause terrible casualties. The Syrians knew it too. They believed the Golan was, for practical purposes, impregnable. The Israeli assault succeeded in 2 days. Commanders moved through the terrain with a confidence that puzzled the Syrians, who had expected confusion, who had expected the natural advantage of fortified high ground to slow any advance to a crawl. Instead, Israeli forces seemed to know where to push, where the gaps were, what lay behind each ridge. The intelligence that shaped those operations had been built across 4 years of dinner parties and radio transmissions, and a man who walked into rooms he had no right to enter and made himself welcome. The eucalyptus trees Cohen had suggested planting were used, according to multiple accounts, as navigation and targeting references. The bunkers they shaded were known. The coordinates had been radioed to Tel Aviv years before. Military historians have argued, with some justification, that the course of the 1967 war, specifically Israel's ability to seize and hold the Golan Heights, was materially shaped by Eli Cohen's work. The Golan Heights would remain under Israeli control. The strategic picture of the entire region would shift. One man, 4 years, a radio no larger than a briefcase. The shadow of his work stretched 20 years beyond his death. The watch that stopped in Damascus, there is a watch. This is the detail that survives the longest, that carries the particular weight of the unresolved. After Eli Cohen's execution, Syrian authorities kept his belongings. Among them, his wristwatch. For decades, Syria refused to return Eli Cohen's remains or any of his personal effects. His wife Nadia, and later his children, kept asking. The Israeli government kept requesting through diplomatic backchannels, through international intermediaries, through every mechanism available. Syria said no, repeatedly, categorically. In 2019, 54 years after Cohen's hanging, Israeli intelligence announced a remarkable development through a covert operation, the details of which remain classified. They had recovered Eli Cohen's watch from Syria. A photograph was released. The watch is ordinary looking. The kind of thing a man might wear to a business meeting, to a dinner party, to a night at the radio. The Mossad chief stood before cameras and said simply that they had brought part of Eli Cohen home. His body remains in Damascus. Nadia Cohen died in 2019, the same year the watch was recovered. She spent 54 years hoping for more. The watch sits now in a case in Israel. It has stopped, of course. The mechanism long failed. The hands are rested at some moment that no one can precisely identify. A moment from 1965, perhaps. A morning in Damascus, the quiet before a knock at the door. There is a line that Israeli intelligence officers sometimes repeat when discussing Eli Cohen's case. It is not from any official document. It is the kind of thing said quietly, among people who understand the weight of what they are saying. He gave us the mountain. The Golan Heights, the high ground that changed every strategic calculation in the region. The position that countries have gone to war over 4 decades. The contested plateau that to this day remains one of the most consequential pieces of land in the Middle East. He gave them the mountain. And Syria kept his bones. In Martyrs Square in Damascus, there is no monument to Kamel Amin Thaabet. There is nothing to mark the spot where a rope ended the life of the most successful spy in Middle Eastern history. The square is just a square now. Traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary noise of a city moving through its ordinary day. Somewhere beneath that city, in a location that no one outside the Syrian government has ever been told, Eli Cohen lies. And the mountain stands. This has been an Unlocked Documentaries production. If you found this story extraordinary, because it is, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment below. History is full of men like Eli Cohen. We intend to find every last one of them